It's Flashcard Fridays at Math, Science, History, and I'm Gabrielle Birchak. I have a background in math, science, and journalism, and it is officially summer. Yay! Some professors are on break, some are working through the summer, superheroes, and if you're not in academia, you are likely planning your vacations or summer activities. So, this summer, Math, Science, History is going to have a special vacation series because it's nice to give the brain a break, and what better time than during the summer. Today, I'm going to talk about a gentleman who was invited on a voyage. He was aimless and didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. So when he was invited on a voyage, he said yes, figuring it would give him a chance to realize his career path. And while on his extended break, he found his calling and made an evolutionary change, pun intended, in the studies of biology, zoology, and botany. Today, I'm talking about Charles Darwin. But first, a message from my advertisers. Today, we're setting sail and going on a 5-year working holiday with a young, seasick naturalist named Charles Darwin. And if you've ever wondered where ideas come from, well, sometimes they come from standing on a deck of a ship, staring at a blue-footed booby and scribbling in a notebook during a storm. So, in December of 1831, 22-year-old Charles Darwin boarded a British survey ship called the HMS Beagle. His official title? Gentleman Naturalist. His mission? To keep the ship's captain company, collect scientific specimens, and observe the natural world as the Beagle surveyed the coastlines of South America. This wasn't a scientific institution. It wasn't a university lab. This was a literal voyage around the world, an adventure, and it became the most pivotal vacation in the history of science. So I'm going to back up a bit. Charles Darwin wasn't exactly a rock star student. He started out studying medicine, hated it, switched to theology, hated that, and only really found his groove when he got interested in beetles and botany. His dad thought he was aimless. So, when young Charles got invited on this voyage by Captain Robert Fitzroy, it was meant to be a gap year, or like 5 gap years, before settling into a, quote, real career. Instead, his trip changed everything. During his 5 years aboard the Beagle, Darwin kept detailed notes on geology, fossils, plants, and animals. He collected thousands of specimens, but more importantly, he observed and he questioned. Why did mockingbirds on different islands have slightly different beaks? Why did extinct fossils look so much like living animals nearby? What was going on in these ecosystems? They were simple observations, but they led to revolutionary thinking. Now, Darwin didn't discover evolution during the voyage. That came years later. But he collected the raw material for the theory while on this working holiday. He watched how species were adapted to their environments. He noticed patterns in coral reefs, in mountain ranges, in birds and bugs. And the most famous moment? The Galápagos Islands. Darwin landed there in 1835. The Beagle only stayed for 5 weeks, but it was enough. He noticed that the finches had different beak shapes depending on which island they lived on, each beak perfectly suited to the local food. But, and this is key, Darwin didn't have that eureka moment right then. In fact, he mixed up which birds came from which islands and had to sort it out later using notes from others. It wasn't flashy, it was messy. It was curious, and that is the beauty of it. Here's what makes this story so human. Darwin didn't set out to transform biology. He was seasick half the time. He missed home. He got bored. But being out in the world, out of the classroom, out of the rigid structure of academia, let him see things in new ways. His brain had space to wander. He was outside in wild nature, far from the lecture hall. In other words, he was on a really long field trip. After returning to England in 1836, Darwin didn't immediately publish a book. Instead, he spent decades going through his notes, breeding pigeons, studying barnacles, and quietly constructing his ideas. When his book On the Origin of Species came out in 1859, 23 years after the voyage, it was a book backed by years of quiet, patient work. But it started with a journey with no deadline, no exam, and no PowerPoint slides. Thank God. It started with a young man saying yes to an excursion. So let's pause there for a second. So many breakthroughs in science aren't bolts of lightning. They're quiet accumulations of curiosity. They come when the rules loosen and the routines break. They come on long walks, on hikes, on vacation. And Darwin's voyage is a perfect example of that. He left England as an amateur and observer, and he returned as a scientist. And here's the twist. The HMS Beagle wasn't looking for an evolution. It was looking to map coastlines. It was about imperial charting. Darwin was a side character in that mission. But in the margins of that journey, a bigger idea was forming. Evolution by natural selection, life adapting and changing across generations, species diverging, populations shifting. It's one of the most important scientific theories in history. And it was seeded, not in a lab, but on a working vacation. Now here's something fun. In his autobiography, Darwin called the Beagle's voyage, quote, by far the most important event in my life and one which has determined my whole career. Darwin knew it was the turning point. He didn't have TikTok or a blog or an academic post, but he had a notebook and an open mind. He had time to observe, time to reflect. And if you ask me, that's the real takeaway here. So, what can we learn from Darwin? Well, 1, fieldwork matters. Darwin's ideas didn't come from reading textbooks. They came from stepping outside and watching the world. Whether you're a scientist or not, stepping away from the desk and into a new environment can trigger fresh thinking. 2, breaks are not wasted time. Darwin's voyage wasn't structured lab work. It was travel, exploration, and a bit of chaos and some seasickness, but it happens. But in that space, his mind had room to see patterns and ask questions. Sometimes clarity comes when you stop trying so hard. 3, observation is a superpower. Darwin didn't invent finches. He didn't invent fossils, but he saw something in them. He took notes, he asked questions, and that ability to notice, to wonder, to follow your curiosity, that's the seed of every great idea. So wherever you are today, on a walk, in traffic, curled up with tea or coffee, remember that even science needs time to wander. Maybe your next big idea is waiting for you outside the lab, off the schedule, or on the road. Until next time, carpe diem.